Hello. Today I'll be discussing a 1986 paper written by Shirley Saraceto, a professor of sociology at California State University, Long Beach, and Dr. Howard Waitzkin, University of California Professor of Medicine and Social Sciences. The title of this paper is Economic Development, Political Economic System, and the Physical Quality of Life. Now, the conclusion of this paper is, as expected, that socialism provides a better quality of life than capitalism at equal levels of economic development. The World Bank was the principal source used for their data, covering 123 countries and 97% of the world's population. They measured the physical quality of life of people through the following variables. The first variable being indicators of health, health services, and nutrition, for example, through infant mortality rate, child death rate, life expectancy, population per physician, population per nursing person, and daily per capita calorie supply. The second being measures of education, for example, through adult literacy rates, enrollment in secondary education, and enrollment in higher education. The third is a composite physical quality of life scale. I'll get into how that was calculated later. The level of economic development was measured by gross national product per capita, and capitalist countries fell across the entire range. For example, from low income to middle income to high income countries, while socialist countries appeared at the low income, lower middle income, and upper middle income levels. The findings showed that in 28 out of 30 comparisons between countries at similar levels of economic development, meaning 93% of the time, socialist countries provided a higher quality of life than capitalism. 93% of the time. I'll repeat. 93% of the time, socialism gave people a higher standard of living than capitalism, given equal levels of economic development. On a side note, this is why it's unfair to compare the USSR to the US. The US not only had over a century of a head start, but also reduced itself to deplorable means, such as the use of slave labor, the exploitation of both domestic immigrant populations, and other sovereign nations. On top of this, the USSR had to endure a brutal civil war in which over a dozen nations, many of which were world powers, invaded its territories. On top of all this, it endured all the sanctions the West had put onto it from its very inception. On top of this even, it endured all the destruction brought about by the Nazi hordes as they destroyed every village, every city, every factory, and every farm they came across. Through all these trials, the Soviet Union not only recovered, but was competing with history's largest superpower, the United States, and even surpassing it in certain cases. Undoubtedly, had it not been dissolved, it may have even surpassed the US in our current age. But this is speculation for another time. Back on track, let's examine how the conclusion of this paper has been reached. First, let's get the question of bias out of the way. Lots of people can say, oh, these are socialists or communists who made this article and blah 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 blah. Well, all the data used in this study is from the World Bank and UNICEF. Clearly not pro-socialist sources. Quite the contrary, actually. Economic development was measured through numerous factors such as average annual growth rate of GNP per capita, energy consumption per capita, percentage of population in urban areas, and percentage of the labor force in agriculture. To assess the relative importance of political economic system and level of economic development, they performed analyses of variance and multiple regression procedures, the results of which showed, as expected, that level of economic development was a strong predictor of all physical quality of life variables. Political economic system also was a strong predictor. The way in which the political economic system of a country was designated as socialist or capitalist was based off of the United Nations classification of countries as market economies or as centrally planned economies. The article delves more into this, but for the sake of brevity, I'll just move on to what the Physical Quality of Life Index really is. Now, the Physical Quality of Life Index is a composite index. It's calculated from the infant mortality rate, from life expectancy, and literacy rate. The article goes into further details on how it's actually calculated. You can look into the appendices for that. As to how countries were compared, the countries were grouped by gross national product per capita into categories of low income, lower middle income, upper middle income, and high income. Also, there was a final one, which is high-income oil-exporting countries. The reason for the distinction between high-income and high-income oil-exporting nations was to avoid distorting the results. See, despite these oil-exporting countries being high-income countries, they were still developing non-industrial countries and hence suffered from all the usual problems of underdevelopment. They scored poorly on many indicators, and their inclusion with other high-income capitalist countries could skew the results and give an inaccurately negative image. Sadly, this level of honesty can rarely be found in anti-communist historical, sociological, or economic publications. But I digress. An additional, recently post-revolutionary class of analysis had been added in order for the data to be as objective as possible, but I'm not really going to delve into it too much. If you want to read more about it, just consult the article. Interestingly, most of the capitalist countries lay at the low income bracket, while most of the socialist countries were in the upper middle income bracket. This is just a observation. Now that we're done with the groundwork, let's take a look at the results. As expected, all measures showed large improvements as the level of economic development increased. This is to be expected. The more economic development you have, the better all measures should be. But what was really interesting is that at the same level of economic development, the socialist countries showed way more favorable outcomes than the capitalist countries in all these measures. I repeat, all the measures. The more favorable performance of the socialist countries was evident in all the comparisons that could be made. Within each level of economic development, the socialist countries had infant mortality and child death rates approximately 2 to 3 times lower than their capitalist counterparts. Similar relationships emerged for life expectancy. Socialist countries consistently showed higher numbers of health professionals per population than capitalist countries at equivalent levels of economic development. The ratio of population per physician in lower middle income and upper middle income socialist countries was similar or even higher than that of high income capitalist countries. Socialist countries consistently showed equal or higher level of enrollment in educational institutions. Not only that, but they provided high quality educational facilities to the whole population regardless of race, religion, language, or ethnicity. To quote the article, even in the wealthier capitalist countries, public health and educational policies have not achieved equitable access for low-income groups, racial minorities, and geographically isolated communities. This is very, very interesting and should be kept in mind. In addition, socialist countries provided a higher daily per capita calorie intake as a percentage of requirement than did capitalist countries at a similar level of development. What this means is that the nutritional supply of all socialist countries exceeded the 100% requirement for healthy life and growth, unlike in the capitalist countries. In all three comparisons within given levels of development, socialist countries achieved much higher physical quality of life indices. In every single measure, middle-income socialist countries either closely equaled or surpassed high-income capitalist countries. If these vast differences can't convince you that socialism is superior to capitalism, then you're either deluded or you're simply in denial. Ik Hwan Kwon, a professor and chairman of the School of Business and Administration in St. Louis, gave a very weak criticism of the findings of this article. The authors of this article, in return, completely demolished his arguments in refutation to his criticism that I have included in the description below. I've also included the actual article in the description below, and I highly recommend you check it out because it has lots of very good information and generally dispels many myths about socialist countries in general. It's actually a very nice read. So, thanks for watching.